Looks like we're on the air, so I'd like to welcome everybody to the public hearing for the site development permit for Evergreen Ford Lincoln dealership. It's a continuation from September 25th, but it really is a continuation from May 1st, August 21st, and September 25th. So we have some administrative things to do first. We have, I have to announce or say who's unexcused. We have, do I have to mention people here? Okay. We have excused members or members present. Mike Brennan is excused. Richard Sanford, Mel Morgan, Richard Soa, Kevin Price, Ben Rush is not here, but he's excused. Brooke Shore and Arthur Schulte. We have two members that are not here but unexcused, Mark Rigos and Nishita Venkatesh. So in addition, we have some minutes to approve from meetings of August 15th, August 21st, and September 25th. So we sent those minutes out earlier. I'm going to ask the commissioners if they have any changes or corrections made to those minutes.
No.
Hearing none, then we will just assume that those minutes are approved by unanimous consent. And so I thank you. And so now, Lucy, I think it's your turn.
So as a quasi-judicial public hearing, I want to take you through some questions associated with that because the purpose is that we are both fair and appear fair, and that necessitates both procedural due process and substantive due process. Procedural process includes the processes that we use, such as providing notice and doing things on the record. Substantive due process means that we make decisions based on adopted regulations. So I would ask, as many of you are familiar, if you would please read through the questions, and then I'll ask you a question in return. Has everyone finished reading the questions?
Yes.
How many of you answer no to all the questions? Great. And then the second piece has to do with, as I mentioned, that all our discussion of the permit happens on the record. Ex parte contacts would be email, discussion, et cetera, that has taken place off the record, outside of the chambers, not being recorded. So I would ask if anyone has had any ex parte communications.
No. No.
Okay, thank you.
Lucy. All right. Okay. Good evening. I'm Katie Cody, a planning consultant with the City of Issaquah. Can't hear me. Okay, I'll try again. Good evening. I'm Katie Cody. I'm a planning consultant with the City of Issaquah. Good to see you all again tonight. We are returning back to you with some additional information. We are still talking about the Evergreen Ford Lincoln project, which is shown here. This is the vicinity. It's located near the Lakeside Industries quarry north of I-90. The project site is zoned intensive commercial and is surrounded by, as I mentioned, a quarry operation and other commercially zoned properties and I-90. The proposal is for a Ford and Lincoln dealership, combined dealership building, service facility, parking, and storage and display for vehicles. The building is proposed to be 3 stories, but maybe up to 4 stories if an additional level of structured parking is added. The site contains the segment of the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, and in addition to being adjacent to a tributary to the creek that is known to have salmon and other fish in it. Another building proposed for the site down here is a display pavilion that would be used to provide frontage onto East Lake Sammamish Parkway. And as part of this proposal, there's an extensive stormwater detention facility, buffer enhancements, and landscaping. So in May, we came to you for the first time with this project. We discussed lots of different aspects of the project. You asked us for additional information. We returned in August to provide that additional information to you. We had worked with the applicant. The applicant made changes to architecture, site elements, had done some additional had planned some additional plantings in the stream buffer, had worked on some sustainability elements, and had made progress on some engineering topics having to do with access. But at that meeting, there was quite a bit of public comment at and before the meeting about this tributary located south of the property on the WashDOT right-of-way. There was a lot of public comment about the nature of the waterway, whether it was a stream or a ditch, that it was known to have fish in it. And at that time, you asked staff to go back and gather additional information regarding that waterway. So we've done that. We've worked with the applicant to study the waterway more. We've come to the conclusion that it's a ditch according to the Issaquah Municipal Code definitions of ditch and stream. We'll talk about that more in detail in a little bit. And because it's a ditch, we also recognize that because there are fish there, even though the critical areas code doesn't apply to the ditch, doesn't require buffers, there's still a duty through SEPA to protect that fish habitat and to make sure that the project doesn't diminish that existing fish habitat. So really where we are now is presenting information back to you on the SEPA process that staff has gone through. The applicant has prepared information about the water source, which helped us to answer the question of stream or ditch, and then the applicant also prepared information about impacts to the fish habitat in the ditch, and then we had our city consultant peer review that fish habitat memo, and our city staff has also peer reviewed the water source memo. So we have, since SEPA is a staff level decision, we've proposed a new SEPA condition, which I'll talk about at the end of the presentations, to address the minor impacts that came from this, the fish habitat study. And at this time, we're not proposing any changes to SDP conditions that would have to do with the code. So this explains sort of the process that we went through. At the top of the question is the question of, is it a ditch or a stream? We looked at the definition of ditch and stream in the code. The difference between a ditch and a stream boils down to the source of water. That definition is unique to Issaquah. A lot of other jurisdictions would define a stream differently, but this is how Issaquah defines a stream. So the question was whether the water source is natural or human-generated. Because it was found to be human-generated, it was defined as a ditch, and then again we went through this SEPA process to come up with some mitigation. So I'm going to invite the applicant up now and have them describe the 2 memos that they have presented to you and their process for doing that. And then I'll come back up and wrap up with the SEPA discussion. Let me get you where you need to be.
Try to get this adjusted here. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and for your time and efforts and energy on this project. I want to start by giving a little bit of background. Yes.
Would you please introduce yourself?
Thank you very much. My name is Tyrell Bradley. I'm the project civil engineer. And the presentation that I'm going to be talking about tonight is a group effort by our wetland biologist and stream biologist, Mike Foster, and Mark Garf, our landscape architect. And so I will be presenting this. Thank you. I want to give a little bit of background on the information that was referenced in the last Design Commission meeting regarding WashDOT's design reports. And as you're aware, in 2016 and 2017, the State Department of Transportation did a stream relocation project of the North Fork Issaquah Creek and a tributary that drained into the North Fork Issaquah Creek. DOT in that report does not reference this as a stream. It references it as a tributary for several reasons, but the focus of the study was obviously increasing the upstream habitat for the North Fork Issaquah Creek. As part of the public process in the last Design Commission, I just wanted to refresh the remand back to city staff and ultimately back to the design team to go look at whether or not this tributary is a ditch or a stream, as Katie mentioned. I don't think we need to look at this. Katie just showed you. So as part of this project, I feel like it's good to kind of clarify what DOT did and what our project is proposing to do, just to sort of set the tone for the conversation tonight. So DOT planted in the lower area, you can see the WashDOT plantings to remain. So when DOT came through here, they did the proper riparian replacement areas as they saw fit for the impacts that were being done to this ditch. The mature vegetation is going to remain on the, it'll be screen north, but it's the east side of the WashDOT plantings. And then everything that's shown in that little tan area is the area that's on the Evergreen Ford Lincoln property that is outside of the WashDOT property. So that's the area that our project can actually plant within. And that's the area that we're going to be doing plantings to enhance that riparian area. So we were given two tasks, as Katie mentioned. The first task was to analyze the water source of this ditch and determine whether or not it was from man-made features like stormwater runoff or whether it was natural sources like spring-fed runoff. Based on that, we were tasked with the second item to determine whether our project would directly or indirectly impact that riparian area that DOT planted when they did the stream relocation project. So I'm not going to bore you with reading your municipal code here, but here is the definitions that we use to craft the first letter and determine that it comes down to the source of the waters. As we read through the publicly available documents, the DOT Basis of Design report, the Issaquah Highlands report, and completing 2 site visits by Mike Foster and myself, we were able to determine that there are 2 drainage basins that contribute to this to this ditch. Here is a very, very high level picture, and I'm gonna try not to get too much into the weeds here, but we have everything in the color on the left is the Issaquah Highlands development. Now, in studying the DOT Basis of Design report and confirming it with the Issaquah Highlands stormwater study, we were able to determine that 75% of all stormwater that enters that ditch is from the Issaquah Highlands development. The other 24.5% is from the Cadman and Lakeside stormwater ponds, the WashDOT water quality treatment pond, and some commercial areas just to the east of the project site. The project itself, if we zoom in here, I did a little excerpt and sort of zoomed it in. The project itself contributes to less than 0.5% of water that enters this ditch. So a fairly negligible impact on the total flow in the ditch. And these percentages are based on the 100-year storm event, so the floodwater storm event. If we zoom in and look at, excuse me, the property itself, I've sort of, a little bit hard to see, but I've highlighted on the north side of the screen here, the main contributor to this ditch is the Issaquah Highlands Beehive Grate. So there's a bubble up structure along 230th Street. As you drive along, you'll notice it's a large bird cage, is what a lot of people reference it as. That bird cage is about 75% of the flow entering this ditch. The Cadman site, oh, can I move the mouse? There we go. So here's the bird cage right here. This outfall here takes all of the water off of 230th, pipes it, and discharges it to the ditch. We have a third discharge here that comes from the Cadman site and Lakeside. There's a fourth discharge, I lost my mouse. There's a fourth discharge point right here that comes from the 2 adjacent commercial properties. The last point of discharge is from the stormwater pond that is adjacent to the highway, from DOT's stormwater wet pond. And then here is the entire ditch until it goes underneath East Lake Sammamish Parkway. There was one area of concern that was brought to our attention, and it is on the east side here. So our project site's down here, and it was kind of to the southeast, and I blew up a section of it. There's 2 natural springs, Camp Creek and Clayton Creek, and both of these were brought to the attention of the design team as we needed to make sure that that didn't flow into the project. So Mike and I went out there and conducted 2 site visits where we were able to go track that these 2 creeks are gathered into a wet pond. They go through an overflow to an infiltration pond. That has a beehive grate that overflows down through a storm system that goes directly to the East Fork of the Issaquah Creek. So this is not included in the North Fork Issaquah Creek drainage basin. So our task 1 findings and conclusions are that based on the review of all the available information, the Issaquah Highlands report, and our 2 site visits, all of the stormwater entering this ditch is 100% from man-made surface runoff. So based on the IMC definition, this ditch is a ditch and not a stream, and the ditch itself is a human-built stormwater system as referenced in the DOT design report. I would like to note that there was a comment made about groundwater and whether or not groundwater would change the definition of a ditch. If groundwater leaked into the ditch, would that change it to a stream? And Greg Johnston with the Watershed Company provided a response back, which, sorry, I'm introducing people midstream here. Snuck that one in there. Greg Johnston is the Watershed Company design support for the staff. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. He's the independent consultant for the city of Issaquah. So he said, no, it does not change it. And I would say that I investigated our geoengineer's report that was prepared by our geotechnical engineer, and the boring closest to the ditch has the water depth 1 foot below the bottom of the ditch, and the study that was recently completed in January. So it's not even a concern. The water table's below the ditch, I will say. So moving on to task 2, we were tasked with trying to figure out, okay, so we have a ditch. Is our project in any way directly or indirectly impacting the riparian areas that were planted by DOT as part of this project? We worked with the city to determine that there are 4 major areas of concern having to do with riparian areas. The first one, water quality functions, pollutant filtration, and fine sediment control. The second being flood attenuation. The third, shading function. And the fourth, large woody debris recruitment. I would like to go through our stormwater system before I go through these 4 points so that you have an understanding of what our on-site system is set up to do as far as its discharge to the ditch. So if we start here on the left side of the screen, the project site stormwater will run off through a modular wetland system, which will provide our treatment. And I would like to say that the Department of Ecology has standards for water that discharges either directly or indirectly to a stream. And we recognize that this project does indirectly drain to a stream through a ditch, and therefore enhanced water quality treatment is required by Department of Ecology standards. We chose a modular wetland system to provide this treatment. The modular wetland system went through a 5-year general use level designation TAPE program with Department of Ecology to receive this enhanced stormwater treatment designation. It had to go through several years of actual in-field testing, and they had to measure the results at the end of this testing. All of the modular wetland systems results exceed the Department of Ecology's minimum standards. So that's step one in our defenses of keeping this water clean that leaves our site. It then is piped to a detention system that's about 70,000 cubic feet, where it'll allow any additional fine sedimentation that makes it into this system to settle out. Then it will be pumped up to a flow spreader that's 100 feet long, go across the tan area. I don't know if you remember, if I go back one slide here, it's going to go across this tan area. So here's our level spreader. It's going to go through this tan colored area for about 7 feet, and then an additional about 25 feet, oops, went the wrong way, additional 24 feet until it reaches the ordinary high water mark in the ditch. So this sort of sets the tone for the on-site stormwater and what we're doing to handle it to meet all of ecology's minimum standards. The modular wetland system takes care of total suspended solids, heavy metals. It deals with phosphorus treatment, which is not something that we're technically required to meet, but it meets the phosphorus treatment as well under the Department of Ecology minimum standards. And then we're going to, on top of that, obviously reduce or outfall through this 30-foot riparian area. Based on the findings of our project, this water quality device is not going to in any way impact the water quality in this ditch in a negative way. And if anything, we're actually going to be adding to it. The project is subject to the newest Department of Ecology manual, which has the highest water quality standards to date. All the 99.5% of water that's coming from the surrounding properties is not meeting the water quality standard that our project meets. So we are going to actually have a positive impact on the water in this ditch. Excuse me. Fine sediment control is obviously an important thing in a fish habitat. We don't want too much and we don't want too little. The modular wetland system and the residence time in the detention system is going to provide adequate time for the fine sediment to settle out into the bottom of this system. This is also a time that I would like to point out that the modular wetland system will have to be maintained on a regular basis, and that the city has a stormwater maintenance program as required by our stormwater drainage report that will require the owner to go out and maintain this modular wetland system and the detention system on a regular basis. The systems themselves have their own regulations around them that ecology sets that require an annual maintenance of the pre-treatment chamber. The main treatment chamber, actually, the media in that chamber is good for indefinitely. It's ecology has given it essentially it's good for as long as the facility will function. Attenuated flow rates. The project meets the pre-developed rate. So if this site was forested, which we have to take into account that this site has actually been a gravel site for the bulk of the last many years. This site was used as the staging area for the relocation project of the stream and was left as gravel. So we're actually modeling this site as if it were forested, a forested flat site. That's what our quality is, or our project runoff is meeting that level of quality. So that, when a major rain event happens, we have to meet as if it was a treed forest. Based on this, there is, no impact to the stream. Actually, it's a benefit, as right now it's a gravel lot, and we're going to be now capturing that water, taking it through the modular wetland system, and then detaining it and releasing it at the pre-developed forested rate. Oops. The shading function is a very important function for any riparian area. The southern exposure of it is one of the most important areas. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide and jump back and forth between these two. The wall along the trail here is the southern side of this riparian area. All the vegetation in green here is all the washed-out riparian areas. This photo was taken 2 days ago. And so this is the current vegetation as close as we can get. This is the current vegetation that DOT planted. Over here is this gravel lot that I was talking about that now has some wild field grass growing in it. The property line is approximately in this area. The dealership will be located over here. The riparian area that was planted by DOT will not be impacted in any way, shape, or form by this project as far as crossing over that property line. The south side of this riparian area was planted by DOT with large trees that will grow into large trees. If you recall the slide back, a few slides back, we mentioned that we're not touching any of the native vegetation. So these tall trees that you see in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, those trees are going to remain as well. There are no trees on the northern side along this area. There are some cottonwoods off to the left side of the screen that we will be removing as part of this project, but those are 59 to 60 feet on the north side of this ditch and don't provide shade benefits for the ditch. Based on this, the fact that we are not impacting the riparian area at all with this project, we determined that we're not having a direct or indirect impact on the shading function of the existing riparian area. The last thing I want to talk about is the large woody debris recruitment. I'm going to go ahead and jump ahead to the slide here that DOT, as part of their project, went through an analysis of placing large woody debris within the ditch area as part of their project. The impact that our project will have on the large woody debris recoupment is none. We are not going to go in and remove any of these large woody debris. They will maintain in place as they currently are. So to wrap this up, the task 2 conclusions, based on all the best available sciences and determining whether or not our project had a direct or indirect impact to the riparian area of this ditch, we conclude that this project does not have a significant impact, either indirectly or directly, to the riparian area. And with that, I will pass it back to Katie.
But Katie, before you start, I'd just like to offer, folks, there's 3 more chairs here. If you would like to take one and drag it back, you're more than welcome to do that. You don't have to stand.
I just want to say a few quick words before we move on. So again, I wanted to reiterate that at the last meeting, you all asked for more information. So this presentation was meant to provide that additional information. And staff read the memos. We worked with our peer reviewer who also read and peer reviewed the memos. We met with the Rivers and Streams Board at their meeting last night, and we've been receiving and reviewing public comment as well. So the combination of the applicant's memos, our peer reviewers, our staff peer review, public comments, and the Rivers and Streams have all fed into staff's SEPA decision. So this is the condition. It's very hard to read, I apologize, but it's also in the MD&S document that I handed around. If anyone wishes to look at it, I've got a few copies. But essentially, we have recognized that the ditch has fish habitat that needs to be, we need to make sure there are no significant adverse impacts to that habitat, that the habitat is not diminished. And so we are requiring the planting area on the property adjacent to that WSDOT planted area to also be densely planted with native trees and shrubs. We've included a standard for density of tree plantings and made a couple notes about a specific type of tree that had been shown on the plans as a tree. The city believed it was more of a shrub. So we will work with the applicant to decide on the specific species of trees that are appropriate there. Also, in order to prevent people, animals, and cars from entering into these vegetated areas, both the on-site and the off-site, we will require a wooden split rail fence to be installed, wheel stops or some other mechanism to prevent cars from hanging over into that vegetated area. And then we're also encouraging the applicant, if they're able to add additional plantings in the WSDOT area. In a previous hearing, we mentioned that we were requiring the applicant to plant in WSDOT, and that was an error on staff's part. We can't require them to plant on somebody else's property, but we certainly would encourage that if they do have a relationship with WSDOT to add additional native trees and shrubs and ground cover there. And then finally, we wanted to recognize the potential for impacts from construction-related activities. So in addition to the city's temporary erosion and sediment control standards that would be required for any site, we're also going to require a double silt fence to be placed along both the north fork of Issaquah Creek and this ditch to prevent any sort of sediment from getting into the waterway. And with that, I think I will close my presentation and open up for questions, or we can move to public comment.
Well, I think what we'll do at this point is allow for public input. Is that- Commissioners, do you have specific questions right now, or do you want to wait till the public has a chance to comment?
We can wait. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the formal process is for me to open the meeting to public comment. What I would encourage you to do, although you do not have to, is if you would choose, sign in before you talk, if you'd like to speak. I don't know how many people are going to choose to do that. Would just suggest maybe no more than 5 minutes, just so we don't stay here till 2 or 3 in the morning. But we're willing to do that. We really do want to listen to the public input. So at this point, we'll open the meeting for public comment.
I don't, well, I'll see.
I don't think anybody signed up.
I'm going to try to get a map up here.
I'd ask you to introduce yourself and tell us your address and go for it.
So because I'm bored out of my mind with this topic, I'm going to tell it like a very strange Halloween-oriented bedtime story. And it's actually a tale of two streams. And there was a big stream and there was a little stream. And the little stream fed into the big stream. And the little stream feeding into a big stream is called a tributary. They're both streams. It's just one feeds into the other. And interestingly, these two streams were of great importance to a bunch of big agencies. The little stream got $1 million improvement. The total improvement between both, $7.2 million, because it was so important to create a wonderful fish habitat so we could have fish forever, right? Fish. Now, interestingly, in this scenario, the city is calling the little stream a ditch. And you go, how is it possible that these two streams with basically the same water and, meeting together at the end, one could be a ditch and one could be a stream. And a ditch has no protections, and a stream has 100 feet of protection. So the city, in its interesting way, said that no natural water source makes it a ditch because it's man-made. And so they show slides and they say, well, you've got stormwater runoff. And me being the curious sort, and of course everybody wants to know what stormwater means. Well, stormwater means runoff during and following precipitation and snowmelt events, including surface runoff, drainage, or interflow. Well, that means nothing to me. So I said, well, okay, I got the word runoff there. Runoff was a primary word. What is runoff? Interestingly, runoff means water originating from rainfall, natural, and other precipitation that is found in drainage facilities. Drainage facilities, I think those are man-made. But rivers, streams, springs, seeps, ponds, lakes, wetlands, as well as shallow groundwater and runoff sources on the ground. So interestingly, in our definition where stormwater runoff, boy, those are natural sources in our stormwater runoff. I'm not really sure how we are saying our stormwater is all man-made sources. Not all of it is, but I'm losing this battle, so I dig in again. And I say to myself, okay, well, let's see if I can find a natural source that's going to be the smoking gun, right? And so I talk to WashDOT, and I get all their reports for their whole series of borings to see where groundwater is. And then I look at their maps of how they built the stream. And their borings and their maps show, one, a great variation in groundwater levels right next to the tributary of 7 feet in a given year. That's a big difference. On the other side, it's 14 feet. So it's huge. It's very connected. And so the bottom of this stream, and I learned a bunch of new words when I was doing this, is in the groundwater from all of the WashDOT information. And they studied the groundwater for, I think, 2 years. So they're very clear, and you should have gotten that information because I did provide it to the city to provide to you. So I say this stream, this tributary, and the big one too, are groundwater fed, so they should be a stream. But no, the city says it's still a ditch, even though now we have 2 different ways of saying that natural water is going into that tributary, which, remember, is a stream. And so then today, interestingly, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I was on the Department of Ecology website, and I found that we have a stream that flows right into the tributary area. And it is identified as an intermittent stream by the Department of Ecology and mapped as such. And I also sent that to you today. So you should have that. So this is source number 3 of natural water going into the tributary. But tonight, disturbingly, it's still a ditch because the city wants it to be a ditch, and Evergreen Ford wants it to be a ditch. And I gotta say, after the millions of dollars investments in public money for the fish, I have to be here to speak for the fish because the city is not, and the developer is not. So then, I'm moving just very quickly on mature vegetation. That mature vegetation is invasive blackberry and nightshade. So deadly nightshade, very poisonous. Don't eat the berries, you'll die. It's an infestation. Oh, that is what the mature vegetation is that is preserving the stream. I also sent you a long diatribe on what I consider mitigation to be in this situation, and I will leave you with this. In our critical area code, a salmonid-bearing stream needs a 100-foot buffer. Those same fish, just adjacent from each other, they are saying will not be impacted at all with no buffer according to their best available science. It can't be both ways. The fish don't know what stream they're in. What is best available science? Our code of a 100-foot buffer necessary to protect these fish, or what they're saying is they don't barely have to do anything. Something is freaky, and that's my Halloween closure. Thank you.
Other members of the public wish to speak, help yourself. Please introduce yourself before you speak.
Hi, good evening, and thank you all for serving. My name's Steve Pereira. I live at 170 Northeast Dogwood Street here in Issaquah. Only really relevant in the fact that I am on the North Fork of the Issaquah Creek. So I wanted to testify to that fact for several points. The first is, I know as we kind of look at downstream flooding that does happen here in Issaquah periodically, I'm kind of concerned that downstream, this ditch tributary area does have water runoff capacity that would be removed by adding this parking area to absorb water. That should be one of the considerations. The second, though, is that I can definitely attest that there are fish in the waterway, especially here in Issaquah, where we talk about loving our salmon and having salmon days, and there's benefits that we treasure both economically that we get from salmon, and that we environmentally and stewardship-wise treasure that we want to keep in mind. I kind of talked about this in a letter that I sent that you should have all received. I'm not trying to repeat my testimony, but I wanted to at least highlight a couple of facts. The first was that aspirational aspect of who we are as Issaquah. The second was when I read through the consultant's report, there was a lot of language in there that it seemed to me that was kind of not very specific about as far as what the benefits were of having a 100-foot buffer, clean water. There were a lot of ways that maybe this new improved system doesn't meet or doesn't standardize as far as having those benefits that I think need to be considered. There was a percentage chart in there that talked about the size of the buffer and the percentage of benefit that was gained by having the buffer. There's still some benefit in there percentage-wise for having salmon. They also talked about that there was that the water that this proposed stream doesn't used for spawning, but only for habitat and for feeding and for resting. Still necessary parts of this stream for the salmon to return each year to spawn again further up the stream where they were hatched and raised. So we're leaving off some points that need to be considered. The third was, I guess I would talk about a logic class I took where it talked about difference between necessary and sufficient conditions. I looked through the city code, and it seemed clear to me that the city code talked about a 100-foot buffer is the legal requirement. There's enough in the city code that talks about needing to preserve that 100-foot buffer with maybe a 25% reduction possible. It seems like there's sufficient reason for all of you to say in a fairly strong way that part of who we are as Issaquah and wanting to be this different and unique city is preserving those unique places, unique ways of going to go there. That there's already been testimony that says $7 million have been invested in trying to preserve the salmon waterways. We have a narrow opportunity to preserve that. I guess I just don't fathom or understand why this process has gotten this far where it takes that hard of a look to say this is who we are and we want to be, to try to use our code and our public dollars to preserve something that we treasure. And I'm looking to all of you to make that strong stand and ask that you please consider that as your basis for making a strong decision in opposition of the approving of this construction. Thank you.
My name is Mary Lynch, and I reside at 2690 Northwest Oak Crest Drive. I just want to thank you, commissioners, for your meeting last month, or when it was, and sending it back to the Rivers and Stream Board for review. My disappointment, though, is with city staff. And in looking back through the Rivers and Stream Board minutes, and yes, this did go now 3 times before the Rivers and Stream Boards, but nowhere in the minutes do I really see that staff clearly identified to the Rivers and Stream Board what decision they had already made in calling this a ditch. If you look at the one report that was sent to the Rivers and Stream Board, it mentions in one of them a tributary. It doesn't say it a ditch there. All they're talking about in that meeting was the fact that they wanted to reduce the 100-foot buffer on the north side, or on the North Creek portion, down from 100. And even there, if you read through the notes and the comments from the board, they weren't in agreement with that, even though in the minutes they had to go back and correct their minutes because city staff said that they did. They did not, if you read the minutes, the corrected minutes. Nor was this, it was only with public comment just prior to your last meeting that all this information that was done and research that was done for the Washtenaw project, was that brought to light to you and then last night to the Rivers and Stream Board. This was, available information and data that city staff did not use in making some of the early on decisions that they should have with Evergreen Ford. And I think the process is flawed. We need to make sure that development staff is representing everybody, including the fish. And yes, we need to have, it's nice to have business here, but if we're going to maintain the quality of life and the quality of the valley floor and the water, we need to do it right. We need to identify these issues early on in the process, and I don't think it's right that we wait to the very last minute and show the studies and information that we had. And this decision for the development staff is basically based on calling it a ditch is in 1996 versus using the current data if this is a stream, not a ditch.
Good evening. My name is Dave Grochon. I'm a longtime resident of both Issaquah and Sammamish of 34 years. I'm also a retired finance leader from the Boeing Company, same tenure, 34 years, and a strong advocate for local business or supporting the local business, especially those that are environmentally friendly. I've had the opportunity over the last 2 weeks to review the site. Over the last 2 nights, I've had the opportunity to sit through a knowledgeable presentation. And my conclusion of looking at the data is the Evergreen Ford Lincoln project in no way will harm the fish or species in that area. And they base that on the following information. It's my understanding on the south side of the property that there's a ditch, and that's not necessarily a spawning ground for the fish, but a place for them to feed and rest. It's also my understanding that the source water of the ditch is a collection of stormwater from the highlands as well as neighboring businesses. And it's also my understanding that the Evergreen site proposal is that their water and stormwater that would come off of their property would be treated to a level of purity equal to or greater than the existing groundwater. In my book, this is a win. This is a win for the community, it's a win for the environment, and it's certainly a win for the hundreds of families that are employed by Evergreen Ford Lincoln. Thank you.
David Kapler, I'm representing Issaquah Trails Club tonight. Why is this a ditch? Well, it's a ditch because Cadman just didn't, and others in Lakeside, have to retain their drainage and clarify their water, and just can't go unrestrained, and it's an artificial and not being artificial created facilities to clean up the water and measure its release. Same with Issaquah Highlands. If we could just let the Issaquah Highlands bleed all their water over the hill, have it natural, then this would be a creek. We need some, fortunately, we do have SEPA to back up when our code is deficient. I'm not sure what we heard tonight was adequate. I don't believe it's adequate in the SEPA revision. When this is all through, or I would hope you will go over to the Parkway and look at this $7 million project and look at the North Fork and look at this tributary and see the work that's been going into it, how much public money has been invested in 2 creeks. Also, we're going to be looking at Chapter 18, the city, which deals with critical areas and a lot of the land use codes. I hope you will be thoughtful in your looking at that, and even though you're not the Planning Policy Commission, I hope you will work on that process as it goes through to make sure you have the codes that you need to appropriately evaluate projects. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Taylor Miller. I'm a business owner and also a longtime resident of the Issaquah area. I'm here tonight to speak in favor of allowing Evergreen Ford Lincoln to the ability to grow their business here in Issaquah as outlined in their presentation. I have gone to elementary school, to high school here in the Sammamish Issaquah School District. I've grown up playing sports here in Issaquah. I've worked in Issaquah since I was 16 years old to present. So I'm genuinely invested in this community and in this city. I think it's fair to say that it's not really a secret that when you come off of I-90 on exit 17, it's always been an eyesore, those dog kennels. It's the first thing you see when you wrap around, and that's the entrance to our city. I don't know about you guys, but I've personally walked down there and I saw trash, I saw feces, needles where druggies are. I mean, that's what's rolling into this ditch. This project that is being displayed here is going to create a gateway from the east that will not only enhance, but improve the water quality to this ditch. The city has an opportunity right now for the site to be developed by a responsible local business owner who understands and respects the value of business, but also understands the value of the environment and is willing to work together with those two things. Overall, allowing Evergreen to improve the site would greatly improve the environment over its current condition, in my opinion. I support Evergreen's project wholeheartedly.
Good evening. First, thank you for your service. My name is Kathy McCory. I'm the CEO for the Chamber of Commerce here in Issaquah, and I'd like to read a little bit of a letter we've already submitted to the Commission and to the Mayor's office. Some of it repeats some of the information that's been shared this evening, so I will not be sharing the whole letter, but you do have it. The Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors would like to take a moment of your time and impart our take on doing business and being a member of this community. Businesses that have chose to locate here and share our community values, and Evergreen Ford is one such long-standing, not to mention family-owned business. As you're aware, businesses are an important element to keeping our Issaquah strong, healthy, and supporting the high quality of life that we have come to expect here in Issaquah. We have rules and expectations for conducting business. Clarity and consistency are compulsory. When those rules change and the envelope is pushed on, it sends a negative message and results in loss of time, resources, and produces unnecessary stresses. It appears, though, the review process, Evergreen Ford and its project have been put through the test and having to stand up to further scrutiny and analysis. We have looked at their project and see that the plans outlined on how it will improve water quality in the North Fork Issaquah Creek exist by the improvement of vegetation between the new development and the creek. The improved vegetation will also improve the water quality and provide shading for the salmon. From our view, it seems this will protect and improve our salmon habitat. It's also our understanding that ultimately, the plans for the water and the stormwater discharge from Evergreen Ford are to be treated at the same purity or higher standards than groundwater. It seems that this improvement is thus a benefit to any species using that waterway. We ask that you support permitting the project as it will improve over existing environments by removing invasive species of plants, directing light away from wetland areas, removing noises away from critical areas, directing any runoff from the wetlands, treating stormwater and at a controlled rate that will preserve plants and soil, and installs barriers to protect areas from people and pets. Lastly, why not consideration of the permit review process, we would be remiss in saying that through Evergreen Ford's jobs provided, and charitable contributions to our local nonprofits, they are important to all of us, and we should, as community, help ensure we retain them here in our community. Thank you in advance for your consideration and again for your service in the community as a whole. This is respectfully submitted on behalf of all of us at the Greater Issaquah Chamber.
Hello, I'm Susan Neville, 2825 Northwest Pinecone Drive, 24-year resident of Issaquah, and thank you for volunteering your time, expertise to the city of Issaquah. I had a letter, or I sent a letter earlier, not sure if you had time to review it. I was at the River and Stream meeting last night until 9:30, and I can't give you that thing back because things have changed at 3:54 today. A final SEPA condition came out informing us of new information. So my first question is, do you have time to look through everything and make a really sound, good decision based on all the new current information? And the second question is, there was a lot of public comment last night, and it was not so it was based on if Evergreen Ford is a good partner in business with us, and I think we all are in agreement that they are. And I don't know if that is the question here. Why is it all or nothing? Why can't we be able to preserve the environment and give Evergreen Ford what they need? Why is there no compromise? All I hear is all or nothing. And that's what I want to leave you with today. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Ned Nelson. I live at 670 Northwest Everwood Drive. Lived there for 25 years. I thought I was going to be the oldest one here in terms of longevity, but apparently not. I come to you as a 20-year veteran of the United States Air Force and 25 years with the Boeing Company. We love Issaquah, lived all over America and the world, picked Issaquah as a wonderful place to live. And the number one reason is we picked it was because there was a whole lot of people just like all of you in this room. And my compliments again to your people up there on the pedestals. I honored you. You are great serving your city. Now, why would a grown man come to this meeting? I come to you because of Nextdoor, the social media site Nextdoor, which had a lot of articles, probably written by my friends over there, about a ditch. And I said, if this city is getting all upset about a ditch, I want to go hear what they want to say. What's going on about the ditch? Incidentally, I want to start this conversation off with, I don't know one person in this room. I don't know any of you up there. I don't know any of you opposers. I don't even know where the Evergreen Ford people are, and I'm not sure where the citizens are, so I don't know those. I honor those people that are opposed to this project. That's one great thing about our country, things that I fought for. You can have opposing opinions. I have worked with you, your people, on planting trees on the Issaquah Creek, down in Lake Sammamish on the state park. I've got my hands dirty. I did it graciously with the Boy Scouts and church groups. It was great. I go to the salmon hatchery all the time. I bring every visitor there. It's great. So, with that said, I come to this meeting and I go, what are we talking about? Last Sunday, I went to Evergreen Ford. I've never been in Evergreen Ford, but I go there on Sunday morning at 7 o'clock, and I go, boy, this is a really nice place. This is clean. I didn't see one bit of garbage. It was immaculate. That's the current Evergreen Ford. And I said, these guys look like pretty good citizens. They're doing their job. And being a car dealer, incidentally, I should preface this. My father was a Ford dealer in 1940. in Moscow, Idaho. The darn war came along and we had to move, but anyway, I do have a background to that. Evergreen Ford looks like it's a model business for our community. Why would we want to send them off to another place? Next thing is, and I've heard tokens of it from the pro people here, this is pretty good for business. I mean, one of the attractions of Issaquah is we have a lot of good businesses. We don't have to drive to Bellevue or to Seattle to buy a car. We don't have to do all these things. So with that in mind, I will close in saying this project is a go. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you, all of you, for being here. My name is Willie Elliott, and I'd just like to say a little thing here, and I'd like to look at it from the point of view of the fish that head up this ditch. Apparently, they're happy to head up there, flap their flippers and swish their tail. They reckon, hey, this ditch ain't so bad. And then I think, well, the city's code says that a stream should have a 100-foot buffer, but because this is a ditch, it doesn't. And so somehow our friends who just swam up there don't get the same protection as fish in a stream. And that doesn't quite seem right, because we should be looking after our fish wherever they are. And so I'm not sure what to do about this. However, I think that if you recommend that a larger buffer be provided, that would be a start. And that would be good. And I'd like to see Evergreen Ford here, and I'd like to see a compromise, as a previous speaker mentioned, that can accommodate both our fish and Evergreen Ford. Thank you.
I don't live within the city limits. Can I still speak?
Yes, ma'am.
Awesome. My name's Tessa Smith, and I own a small women-owned, women-led architecture firm that works in this region. And I was struck by how there's a vocal minority, it feels like to me, that would love to see no development happen. And I have a sustainable design degree. I lecture at my alma mater, the Evergreen State College and University of Oregon, teaching young people how to operate architecture firms in a way that honors the planet. Sorry, I'm nervous. But the problem with no development is that then you don't get to say how things are developed. You have to support good development and stop bad development. Cities that don't grow die. And then you can't have money to honor fish and to save areas that are worth saving. There's a sign here about Ansel Adams, and I do believe the quote is taken quite out of context. He protected the areas that needed protecting, but he also lived in a house in Seattle, and he used their roads and their hospitals. And those were funded by maybe not good development then, but probably good development now. So I understand the appeal of passion, but what I tell the young people that I sculpt and the students I encourage to go into architecture is that passion is good, but reason is better. I see a lot of reasonable data before us that supports that this would be an improvement to that stream. And that's coming from someone who's quite left. So left, some of my family won't talk to me. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hello. I've been here before, I believe. My name's Tony Wren. I'm the executive managing partner for Evergreen Chevrolet, a partner across the street from Evergreen Ford, its current location on 18th Avenue Northwest here in Issaquah. I moved here many years ago. I was born in Ballard. It's about the only place that's as fishy as this place. I grew up next door to the Woodland Park Zoo after that and spent a lot of time with a fort and the giraffes. I've grown up loving animals, and I've grown up loving our Seattle area my whole life. We had a grandmother that lived on the top of Tiger Mountain in a log cabin, log house when I grew up before I-90, and we used to make the trip out here to Issaquah, and my father's sister was moved and built a house in the backyard out in Tiger Mountain, and they turned out to be the first pharmacists here in town in the 50s and 60s, right where the Ben Franklin was. So I have a long tie to the Issaquah community and the Northwest and the Puget Sound community. Dan, my partner Dan Rowe, and his family moved here in '98. I moved to Issaquah with my family, my wife Lynn, in 1999 from Everett area. The reason I bring this up is I think it's important to be local, and I think it's important to have local ties to the area, and we have that. And the reason I'm bringing this up, I want you to know who Evergreen is. It's not about cars. It's about family, and it's about business, and it's about community. And it has been since the day I moved here. When we moved here, we made promises to everyone in our family and everyone that we did business with that we were going to join the community full force. And we did just that. We joined Rotary, we joined Kiwanis, we joined the Chamber of Commerce. I've spent 18 years off and on. My wife, 6 years, me 6 years, me another 6 years on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce. My wife's been the vice president of the Downtown Issaquah Association, and then she made it to president after that. She served 2 terms there. She sang national anthem for the Rotary Run for Salmon Days for years. Does the announcing at the parade. We provide all the cars and drive all the dignitaries around to the parade. We have a great time doing it. It's one of the greatest things we do yearly is Salmon Days, and we love every minute of it. Our heart's here. Right after we got here, the first 2 years we got here, we were named King County Municipal Business of the Year 3 years after we opened. The next year, the Chamber of Commerce named us Business People of the Year. 10 years later, Dan Rowe was named Business Person of the Year here by the Issaquah Chamber. We're melted into the fabric of Issaquah. We don't want to go away. We want to build a future for our family. We have over 200 families that we employ. We have 5 kids that we've brought up. Dan's brought up 2, and I've brought up 3. All 5 went to local high schools, went away to college, came back, and all 5 are employed at Evergreen right now. I have my first grandson that I picked up at pre-K down at, right down the street here at the Commons. I picked him up from pre-K, and it was sunny. It was a Tuesday, and the first day we walked down to the salmon hatchery, because I knew the fish were there and I wanted him to see them. You sneak down by the bridge and sneak right down. You could almost walk across the river. It's so beautiful. Whenever we get a new employee, I take that new employee down. We park right on the side of the bridge, and we walk down between the gray house. We sneak through the little gate there, and we walk down to the corner right before it turns into the hatchery, and I show new employees what Issaquah is all about. I mean, that's who we are. That's Evergreen, Evergreen Ford, Evergreen Chevrolet, Evergreen Lincoln. That's who we are. We think we have a good location. We have a fantastic plan. They've laid out all the newest science for you. We're going to leave it better than we found it. That's why you should approve the project and support us and help us support the 200 families that we support with their jobs and their livelihood here. So we're not going anywhere, as I know you aren't either. Let's be partners. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Carrie Ruby. I was born and raised right here in Issaquah. Been here 51 years, in Sammamish currently now. My family owns property that is along Locust where this ditch is, and I believe we've had it since the early 80s. I can honestly say there was sometimes weeks, months with zero water in this ditch. As the development in Sammamish has progressed, and the Highlands per se, there's now more water in that ditch. I also agree in the comments earlier about compromise. If the fish are somehow finding their way into this ditch, isn't there a way to direct them to stay in the creek somehow so it can't get into the ditch? The city is growing. It doesn't have the one stop sign at Gilman in front like it used to 40 years ago. We used to keep our dogs at Carlson Kennels on that same corner. And it's sad to see it be empty and vacant and an eyesore for the city right now. I'm supportive of Evergreen Ford. I'm supportive of the salmon and the fish. So I'm urging compromise for everybody. Thank you.
Good evening. I prepared the statement I'd just like to read. My name is Warren Michelson. I'm a resident of Sammamish and a longtime customer of Evergreen Ford Lincoln. I'm here to encourage the Development Commission Board to grant Evergreen Ford Lincoln permission to construct their new dealership as outlined in their presentation. After personally walking the site and reviewing it and seeing the presentation again tonight after last night, it is obvious that the ditch on the south side of the property is simply there to drain the overflow water out of the Issaquah Highlands retention system into the Sammamish Basin's ecosystem further downstream. Furthermore, it's my understanding that this man-made ditch only carries water when it is released from the retention vaults and is completely dry during certain times of the year. It seems clear to me from the biologists, civil engineers, and city's perspective that the Evergreen Ford Lincoln dealership as designed will have no impact on this ditch. I'm deeply concerned that if Evergreen Ford Lincoln is not permitted to build their new dealership as designed, we may lose a very valuable business in our community. As I understand it, Evergreen Ford Lincoln employs approximately 200 people and is an avid supporter of our East Side schools, towns, and various nonprofit organizations. In addition, I believe that developing the property as designed would remove the current eyesore by removing the old dog kennel that I understand occasionally houses drug users. Therefore, I strongly support allowing Evergreen Ford Lincoln to build on their site as designed. Thank you.
My name's Wright Knoll. I'm counsel for Evergreen Ford, and I too would express appreciation. A couple things that I want to address a little bit is the theory of compromise. Like this is a conflict or a battle. That's not the way Evergreen has gone into this process. It's worked with the city. It's worked hand in hand with the city to comply with the code. It's worked hand in hand with the city to make sure it's compliant with SEPA. The project as it sits now is a work in process of working with the city to make sure it was compliant with the code and with all the regulations. It is what it is now. The footprint can't change without the project going away. So we've worked with the city. We've been diligent with the city. And working together, it's a give and take process to make sure that we're satisfying the best available science. And we've hired, at great expense, engineers, scientists to look at it and provide information to you guys. The other suggestion that we don't have enough information and it has to go back somewhere and look again, I want you guys to know that every time that happens, it's thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars, that occur on two fronts. One, hiring people to provide information, that, but two, the construction delays are terrible. Construction costs continue to go up every time you're delayed. It's a significant expense. So that's my 2 points, is the process is important, but the process needs to be concluded so that this project can have a decision, and that we have worked together, and the compromise is where we are right now.
Thank you. Other comments?
Hello. I'm Janet Wall, and I live at 22740 Southeast 56th Street in Issaquah. I've lived there for about 25 years. Although I am a member of the River and Streams Board, I am speaking tonight as an Issaquah resident. I'm also a retired fisheries biologist and a volunteer doing habitat restoration. My concern is that the salmon-bearing watercourse, identified as a tributary to the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, is being termed a ditch, and as such, it would have no protected buffer. The Evergreen Ford proposed development would remove all but one of the trees on the lot, and almost all of the large lot would be in impervious surface, either the large auto dealership building or paved parking lot. The stormwater runoff from all this impervious surface is proposed to be filtered and treated, then released in a controlled method through a level spreader down a bank into the tributary. Presumably, although I didn't see any notice of this in the plans, a curb or wall at the edge of the parking lot would prevent water from a heavy rain from spilling the water over the banks into either the North Fork or the tributary, and instead would funnel the water, this is what it should do, would funnel the water into the treatment controlled distribution system. But I haven't, as I say, if there was in the plans, I didn't see it. Part of the tributaries banks were vegetated as part of the WashDOT culvert project. But it appears, and they pointed out, that the area, that part of that bank of the tributary wasn't revegetated. And at one time, they proposed doing that. When I asked last night whether they still plan to restore the banks of the tributary, the answer I received was that they initially had considered this, but they had backed away from doing this as they would have to get WashDOT's permission to amend their plantings on WashDOT's land. I'm concerned about erosion from the stormwater discharge into the tributary. WashDOT spent a lot of money improving the culvert for the North Fork and the tributary. Fish are using this tributary, and I'm worried that all that stormwater spilling over into poorly vegetated bank is going to cause erosion. I also am concerned that I couldn't find any information about how the applicant intends to meet the tree retention requirements, especially since they are backing off doing amendments to the WashDOT plantings. So I've seen no how they're going to compensate for the cutting down all those trees. I also believe in compromise. I believe they should be allowed to develop the site. However, I feel that Evergreen Ford should at least revegetate, amend those plantings that WashDOT did, especially on a good portion of the area where it looked at that the level spreader was going to deposit the stormwater. They also need to abide by the tree ordinance better yet, and I also would like to see some kind of permanent recognition of that bank of the stream, and hopefully both banks, as being an official buffer, so that there will not be any further incursions into that stream buffer. I also, as I say, I believe in compromise. I believe that they can still develop, but I would like to see a little bit more compensation to avoid having any damage to that creek. Thank you.
Final call, if you feel compelled, this is your time. Seeing no movement, we'll close the public portion of this meeting and open the floor for the commissioners to have their ask questions or discussion.
Could we have an update on what the Rivers and Streams Board said? I think you guys said you would explain that as part of the SEPA discussion.
So at the meeting yesterday, the applicant gave a very similar presentation to them, and I also gave a very similar presentation to them, and we took public comment, and the Rivers and Stream Board recognized their role as advisors in the process and asked some questions. I don't know if I mean, they didn't make a decision. They asked some questions about how the applicant had studied the water sources and how they had determined that it was a ditch and not a stream. And do you know of, I'm trying to remember the exact questions that they asked.
Well, because Rivers and Streams contributes to the SEPA decision, many of the revisions that you see there are reflecting things that they commented on. So concerns about whether we could, as Ms. Wall mentioned, whether we could have additional plantings in the WashDOT property. So there is a request, not a requirement, because we can't force them to plant on property that they do not have a right to plant on. But that was added into the condition.
Another one of the public comments that came up yesterday had to do with temporary impacts to salmon during construction. And that, so we discussed that with the board, and that was what fed into the part of the SEPA condition that required some additional temporary sediment control measures.
Was there any discussion of additional buffering at Rivers and Streams? Was that brought up, or did they have an opinion on that in regard to the tributary area under SEPA authority to do that?
Well, not under SEPA. I think they would like to have treated it as a stream, but I think they generally understood the basis with which we had presented it based on the current code. And so did not recommend additional landscape area. We spent quite a while talking about the kinds of trees that were planted, and that there was concurrence that vine maples did not really qualify as trees, and that we needed to pick a different native tree that would be more appropriate in that area.
So I attended the Rivers and Streams Board meeting last night as well. One of the tree comments that came up, I think, from Ms. Wall was that cedars, western red cedars, would not be a good choice because of the propensity to die during droughts, I think. And I think there was a comment from the applicant's consultants about maybe changing the landscaping plan in terms of the tree selection to more Doug firs instead of western red cedars. There was another comment that came up that I had a question about, was a mention of whether the tributary ditch could be a salmon-bearing stream or not, and I thought I'd heard a comment from Watershed that it was too shallow of a slope, too flat, if...
Specifically with regard to spawning.
Greg, could you come up to the microphone, please?
And please introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Greg Johnston from the Watershed Company, and I'm serving as the city's peer reviewer. And the comment was specifically regarding to spawning habitat, not habitat in general, so that the gradient, I believe, is too low there. It's too flat to maintain good spawning conditions, which is good spawning gravel so the water can flow through the gravel, which is needed to incubate the eggs. It's my view that tributary can function as salmonid fish habitat, but more in terms of rearing and refuge habitat. And it's been brought up here a couple times that the stream is seasonal, so there's no water there in the summer, except, it's going into a little more detail, but given that it's stormwater fed from detention ponds up on the plateau that, or Issaquah Highlands, is that you can have summer storm events that would cause this ditch to flow on and off through the summer, whereas a natural drainage probably wouldn't do that. So you might come along after a summer storm and find there's flow there for a few days or a day or two, which you wouldn't necessarily see in a more natural stream. And I'm getting a little off the subject, but just in general, the kind of habitat that this would support would be rearing and refuge habitat for juvenile fish mostly. So the idea is that you have a storm event in the winter, and the fish need a quiet area to get out of the fast-flowing flows, whether say in the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, they're finding a refuge, which is the same kind of quiet flow. And also coho salmon in particular, they rear in freshwater for a full year. They'll hatch as fry in usually around April of a year, and then they'll stay in freshwater for an entire year and then go to sea the following April. And during that one winter that they're in freshwater, the temperatures are low. They have low energy because of the low temperature, and they're looking for a quiet area to spend that winter, such as, I think the best example I can give would be like a beaver pond habitat is where those coho would want to spend that winter. And I envision this tributary ditch, as we've been calling it, as being habitat something like that. It's off the channel, it's low energy. It does have water in the winter, whereas it doesn't have water in the summer. It wouldn't make good summer rearing habitat for them because there's no water there. And if there were water there, it might be warm. So that's the kind of habitat that I would envision that it be there.
Would it still be slow? I'm curious, like we're talking about like big storm events, it could come from the highlands down through the drainage system into would it tend to be a faster drainage sometimes in the winter than in the north?
It would increase the velocity some, but given that the slope of the channel is so low that the velocities wouldn't get too high, the water level will come up, but there will be some velocity there, but it won't be as high. But also the refuge, even from the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, right at that location, it's just come down a long ravine past the gravel pit there, and so it's possible that fish would be looking from a refuge even from the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, and that's why they would seek that. I think a comment was made earlier about, well, can't we keep the fish out of the ditch because keep them in the creek, implied where they belong, but I think it's a good idea to let them make the choice if they have access to the ditch. If they don't like the habitat, they like the habitat better in the North Fork of Issaquah Creek, they can stay there, but I don't see any problem with letting them choose and expand and to use that habitat temporarily as refuge and rearing habitat when it's suitable. And as long as there's good access to and from, they can get out of there in the spring when the flows go down too low. But they can make good use of it throughout the winter.
Can I ask you one more question, too, about, we had received a comment that mentioned the possibility of planting larger trees along the property boundary with the ditch portion, the DOT portion, instead of small trees that would take years to grow up, but planting like 12-foot trees or taller, is there a benefit to that? Do you have a recommendation with regard to
So
that?
of a given species, just planting larger specimens, not, just to
Correct.
clarify, it's not necessarily a species that will grow bigger, but just
Like
instead
a
of planting.
5-year-old tree instead of a
Yeah,
1-year-old
well,
tree or something?
you just save yourself, whatever time that is. If it's a, if it's a 8 or 10 or 12-foot tree, they're pretty pricey. When you gain that much time, they'll reach maturity quicker. One note, though, is we've kind of gone back and forth on this, of how important the shade and the temperature is. Given that it's a seasonal stream, the shade is not that important when there's no water in the stream. You don't really need shade in the winter because the temperatures are not high, and if the channel is dry, well, the shade isn't really providing much protection temperature-wise. But given that this is a stormwater fed system, like I said, it could have flow occasionally in the summer due to storm events, rainfall events, and given that it's stormwater and it's fed by impervious surfaces, that it could have some flow in the summer. So there's some limited benefit to having shade. But this is it's an unusual stream. It's not like a normal perennial stream or a normal seasonal stream, which would tend to dry up for several months at a time, perhaps. But I think this channel could have some flow off and on throughout the summer that wouldn't be typical of a normal seasonal stream.
Thank you.
Can I add one piece? Well, two pieces. One, the joint property line is on the north side of the ditch, so there's a question about how much shade. I mean, I suppose certain trees, once they grow up, might arch over. The other is that studies have generally shown that smaller trees, not little tiny trees, but smaller trees in the size of sort of our minimum requirements actually are less shocked. And so even if you put in a big tree, it will be shocked longer. And so at the end of 5 years or so, they're about the same size, but you may have less mortality of the smaller tree. So while I agree with where you're trying to get to, I'm not sure that some of the studies have borne out that planting a bigger tree will get you to a more mature tree more quickly.
Thank you.
Excuse me, following question. I'm sorry, Mr. Name, is it Mr. Johnston?
Yeah.
Yes. I had a question on the watershed report. It's in the staff report on page 250 of 476. And in this area, you're referring to the macroinvertebrate population as food source for foraging salmonids. And you quote a source by Sweeney, 2014. In conclusion, most available data based on replicated control studies suggests that a streamside forest of greater than or equal to 30 meters is needed to protect and maintain fish communities in a natural or near natural state. And these macroinvertebrates, right, are the primary food source for rearing salmon, is that true?
Yeah, that would be like the aquatic insects. So juvenile salmon feed primarily on
right. So although you indicated that impacts on water quality and shading were negligible or minor, I don't see how that requirement for macroinvertebrate thriving would be addressed by anything I've seen in the report.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a really good answer for you. I guess one distinction too is back to the seasonal versus perennial channel or streams, is that a lot of these macroinvertebrates require year-round flow. There's only certain ones that can work seasonally like that. In other words, they have to move in, lay their eggs and grow to maturity and get out before before the next summer because it dries up. So I would tend to downplay that requirement or that function of the especially wide buffer for this particular intermittent or seasonal stream. The reference you read talks about streams, in a broader sense in general, and I think it would be more applicable to a perennial or a year-round stream.
So you're saying that when there is sufficient water in this stream, that preserving the macroinvertebrate population would be important, but at times that the stream does not hold water would not be important.
Yeah, something like that. Mostly what I'm saying is there, and I don't know a lot of the details, but there are a lot of insects that require a longer period in the stream to mature than just one wet season. They will be there. They need to be there in the summer season as well to complete their life history and to be productive. So you get less production out of a seasonal stream in terms of macroinvertebrates. The insects that use it have to move in quickly, breed, grow to maturity, provide food for the salmon, and then get out of there, before the next dry season. Whereas if it flows year-round, they have a lot longer to establish their populations and be a productive food source for the fish.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments, questions, commissioners?
A question for the applicant. First of all, thank you for the public comment and the presentation. The diagrams were greatly appreciated. Question regarding the stormwater dispersion trench. What is the risk, if any, regarding erosion? There was a comment earlier that hinted to that, and I'm just curious what the answer is there. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, Tyrell Bradley, project civil engineer. The dispersion trench is 100 feet long. The peak flow at the 100-year storm event, so the peak storm event that we would be designing to is 0.3 cubic feet per second of water, which is about 120 gallons per minute. Once spread out over the entire 100-foot flow spreader, ends up being about an 1/8 inch of water cresting that flow spreader over that 100 feet. So it really, the velocities of the water will be slim to none. It's going across 2% slope for about 20 feet before entering the top of bank and going down to the ordinary high water mark. So we are not talking about any sort of scour of this water as it leaves the level spreader.
Thank you.
What about, I guess, there could be storms, or probably will be storms, that are in excess of the detention, correct? I guess what happens in an emergency situation?
So anything greater than the 100-year storm event, which would be a 500-year event, will hit the bypass and just overflow, the same way the rest of the stormwater overflows through that level spreader.
Okay, so it'll just be increased flow out the level spreader.
Yeah, and I believe the 500-year storm event, I don't have it offhand, but I think it's like 1 CFS, I think. 0.3 was the 100-year, 1 CFS. It's like a exponential increase. It's not linear, as I'm sure you know. But I will say, at the 500-year storm event, the entire city will be underwater. So I don't know if you'll be driving by worrying about this site. You'll be rowing by.
Can I say the entire site would be, all the water that comes down in the site would go into the system, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And then anywhere where there's not like a curb cut for cars to drive through, would everything be curbed along, especially along the ditch edge there?
Yes.
Prevent any water from flowing out?
The entire exterior of the site will be curbed to contain all water within the site. And the previous public comment, I'm sorry if it wasn't clear on the plan, but it all does get channelized to the modular wetland system via curbs.
And then can you sort of describe what would, if we looked at the whole site and all the rainfall that would come down on it, generally where it sits now, where would all that go now? And presumably afterwards it would all go through the spreader and come out.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, and this is actually a part of Department of Ecology's requirement that I have to go through as a stormwater designer. Right now, the stormwater discharges in this area, naturally flowing over the gravel, the field, I will say, and discharges in this area. So when we picked a discharge location, as part of the requirement, I have to discharge the water in the exact, as close as you can to the same spot, so you're not trading basins. So that's why we placed the level spreader in that location, was to maintain the basin discharge.
So the majority or all of the water generally from the improved site is already coming to that ditch?
That's correct.
Okay, but it would come through the retention system?
Yes.
filtered and
Treatment,
spread and
detention,
treated.
level spreaded, released, yes.
Thank you.
Is that system on backup power? I've been only here a year, but it's from time to time we do lose power. I'm just curious if that system is on backup power.
I would need to ask the owner on whether or not they will have a backup power source.
Okay.
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay.
Sorry, just one more. So the new vegetated strip in the SEPA condition, what's the width of that? Did you say that's about 7 feet just above the level spreader area?
That's correct, yeah. The space from the edge of the level spreader to the property feet.
And how far does it run linearly?
Yeah, it starts down here and then runs all the way up around the corner.
Can you, I'm not sure you two are talking about the same thing. Were you asking about the level spreader?
No, the new vegetated strip proposed in
great.
SEPA condition
Great.
1.
I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure.
Right, thank you.
And I'm not sure who the best to answer this question, or a couple of them. One would be, who maintains the DOT property? So questions came up or comments came up about the DOT project now having blackberries and other invasive species growing in it. And is the DOT responsible for maintaining that? If they don't do it, is there enforcement?
So I'm going to make a general comment, and then I'm going to look to the applicant, because we've had obviously some misunderstandings about what their agreement with WashDOT is. In general, each property owner is responsible for their own property. And what the public comment that was made, I'm not sure, there was the 2 different greens that showed the area where WashDOT had worked on the ditch, and then the rest of the property that was untouched. I made an assumption that that was the area, the untouched area was where the blackberries and deadly nightshade that were referenced, but I don't personally know that. I hope that maybe someone from the applicant can speak about if they have a role in maintaining any of the WashDOT plantings that were part of their project.
My name's Eric Hansen. I'm the owner's rep on that project. So the plantings that were done by WSDOT, are maintained by WSDOT.
Okay.
I presume that we don't really have any control over WSDOT. If they don't maintain something and it overgrows, it just overgrows. And property, there was a question that came up last night too about the maintenance of any of the plantings, something about after 2 years the city maintains, but I didn't catch what that was, or was it the stormwater system?
Stormwater system.
So I'm going to answer about just plantings in general, then maybe, I don't know whether maybe Doug should answer. So just because you're asking about various maintenance pieces. So the city obviously requires that the plantings that are approved, whether it's for mitigation or for just general landscape planting, we have a performance bond to ensure that the plantings are installed. Then for just regular plantings, they have to be maintained for 3 years, and then we do another inspection to make sure that they've essentially established. However, in a critical area, as part of a mitigation plan, it's actually a 5-year monitoring period. So that's just the landscape piece. I think you may have been asking about the stormwater system.
That's maybe what I heard, yeah.
Doug Schlepp, the consultant engineer for the city. And the stormwater system in question on site is proposed to be a private system, and that would be maintained by the owner. And I'm not sure if you'd asked
What kind of inspections does the
Yes.
city do?
So we'll be doing inspections during construction, and then upon completion of the project, the city has staff in the Public Works Engineering Department that goes out regularly, and within that first year, they're looking at the facilities, the private facilities, to make sure that they're being maintained properly, and then they will develop a regular schedule to inspect those. Additionally, there's a covenant that is recorded on the property to allow the city staff to enter the site and inspect these facilities when they see fit.
Thank you.
Do you know the planting width on the North Fork of WashDOT's plantings? Does anybody know that?
So I'm going to answer obliquely. So what I would say is one of our conditions is that the plantings along the North Fork have to, I think in general, the tree and shrub planting is consistent with the city requirements. However, there aren't ground covers, and so the applicant is required to complete the planting along the North Fork to match our standards.
I guess, but do you know the width of WashDOT's planting?
Oh, you mean the actual, like from the creek?
Distance, yeah.
Oh, I think it was like 30 feet, 35.
Yeah, it's 25
So
feet.
So it's less than 75?
Yes.
Okay. And on the other side, it was 17 to 24, I believe?
7 and 24. So it's
No,
about,
just WashDOT's plantings.
oh, yeah, it's 24.
Okay. So is there anything done by WashDOT that is being removed by this project?
No.
Another question, I guess about the impact of lights on the any fish that might be in the tributary, given that cars will be parked along there and so forth, and if it's 25 feet away.
Yeah, and I believe we sort of touched on this in the last design commission, but it's good to refresh our memories on it. So all of the parking lot lighting will be shielded with cutoff.
And I think I'm thinking more of just the cars along that will be parking along there. along
Like
that
the
street.
headlights as they...
The headlights, right.
Well, I don't think they'll be moving any vehicles at nighttime. That'll be display parking, so the cars will be parked there during...
4 o'clock in February. It'll still be dark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't...
Here's a question, would lights like that have an impact on fish habitat?
So
No, I don't think...
what I would say is lighting and fish habitat, we've been, we're in the process of updating our shoreline master plan, and we've received some questions about that topic, and we're working with, I know the acronym, and WIRA 8, which is the Water Resource Inventory Area, in which Issaquah is located, and they are beginning to explore that topic and what standards should be in place. In other words, right now, there aren't standards in place, and so we don't, I'm not saying they don't have an impact, I just don't think those levels have been established yet. The one standard that I'm aware of is that things like parking lot lighting, the city of Issaquah has a requirement to limit light spill at property lines or into critical areas to 0.3 foot candles. And in speaking with the WIRA 8 representative, we are probably the only community in their area that has that standard. So we are applying the limited tools that we have, but at this point, we don't have enough information to know or to establish another standard.
The effective lights really is the increase in predation at night for the fry. And so my guess would be a car light flashing on the river would not be a real incentive for predators to eat a lot of fish. The parking lot lights would be an issue, but as I said, they're going to shield those.
Okay.
I would add one more comment too, is the vehicles will be display vehicles and they'll be most likely backed in along that entire thing because of the vegetation. They'll be facing towards the dealership.
Question I had too, would it be best to have a requirement that all vehicles be backed in along that border? If they're likely to be anyway, then
I don't know if you can require someone to back a vehicle at all times in, but
well, yeah, I mean, a lot of places you'll go to like a garage or something that said back in parking only, and for whatever reasons, fumes or whatever. In this case, it may be for the oil coming out of an engine.
So we did add a SEPA condition, like along the creek, along the ditch, to have wheel stops or some other mechanism to ensure the cars stay out of the landscape, because of the concern that we wouldn't want.
Right. So here's one of my thoughts too, or I guess, so put it in form of a question of the, again, we have a 75-foot buffer at the North Fork. Give us lots of protection and room for any incidentals that may come out of the parking lot and so forth. Here we have a 25 to 35-foot buffer from the ditch. Seems to me one of the ways that we can, without losing the parking stalls, without losing usable area, still maintaining that buffer, but one way to help create a better buffer might be to create a solid fence that would prevent just human nature, people getting out of car, tossing a cigarette, tossing a wrapper, things like that. This ditch is pretty close. There could be things in there. I know it's more expensive than a split rail fence, but if we had, say, a 5-foot solid fence along that property line, it seems like it would help us create an effectively larger buffer. I don't know if that's a crazy idea or not, but.
So I don't know that it's crazy. The one hesitation we would have in our experience is that higher, more solid fences are more likely to encourage people dumping things over them.
Well, but I wouldn't expect.
I'm not saying that Evergreen Ford would do that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying when things are visible, people, I think, tend to respect them more. So I think the question might, you may be questioning whether it should be less permeable, but than a split rail fence would be. But I don't know that. I think it's wise to be able to see what's on the other side, I guess, is part of my concern, even though, so that might be more like alternating boards is another option, so that you can see what is on the other side if people have dropped things over there.
If you need to.
Right.
Well, I would ask if you can see when you're going on the off ramp and looking over at the Ford dealership, can you see those cars? Are you going to be able to see those cars? And that, if you can, it would seem like that would be part of the value of the location, so that you could.
I don't think so. I think there's too many trees there.
I don't know.
Along the off ramp there to. My bigger concern is trying to create an effectively larger buffer without taking away usable site area.
I can answer the last question. It's Eric again. Because of the elevation coming off the off-ramp, you can easily see onto the property.
Down to the ditch?
Down through the ditch, yeah.
From the
So,
off-ramp
yeah,
to the ditch?
all of those would be display vehicles that would be seen from the off-ramp.
Just a clarification on the North Creek, what are I don't need the exact spot elevations, but what is that height difference between the blue and where the Evergreen cars are parked in the parking stalls? I'm just trying to envision the headlights and whether really any shine down on the creek.
Yeah, so it's about 7 to 8 feet below the vehicle.
I'd like to say I share Commissioner Morgan's concern about the size of the buffer area we're talking about here, especially in light of the watershed report, again on pages 249 and 250. It's talking about a 33-foot buffer can be counted on to remove 67 to 100% of sediment, and a 33% foot buffer could be counted on to remove 69 to 98% of nitrogen and phosphorus. So we're as low as 2/3 of the removal rate here. And we're very close to the used car parking area of this display. So I'm wondering if there's anything else that we can do to enhance that area, the mitigation in that area. We only have a 6.5, 7-foot planting strip along here. And it seems that we're barred from going into the washed-out property. But I wonder about that. Is there any creative way that the applicant could find to talk to WashDOT in a more meaningful way to allow bringing the planning in there up to a better quality? Applicant have any plan or approach to being able to do something like that? Seems like a possible kind of compromise to me, and I'm running out of compromises otherwise, and I really think a compelling case has been made for a larger buffer area above this tributary.
Yeah, I can answer that question. I would like to remind the commission that the water coming off of this site will be 100% collected, treated, and then released. So the riparian area is not needed for the water leaving our site. Obviously, it's needed for other benefits, but the stormwater leaving our site will already be meeting the ecology minimum standard for release to a stream or to a tributary to a stream. So I just kind of want to remind us of that. I'm sorry, I missed the second point of that question now.
How to work with WashDOT?
Yes.
To get them to allow bringing the planning in there up to a more effective mitigation level.
Thank you. So when WashDOT completed this work, they left it at the standard that they coordinated with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Washington Fish and Wildlife. So that was peer reviewed by WDFW and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and they found it to be adequate at the time that they left the project, the riparian areas that they left. We are not having any impact to the WashDOT riparian areas. Therefore, asking WashDOT to do additional plantings in there is actually asking WashDOT to increase their maintenance of that area, which they already found adequate when they left. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
I think there's a slight misunderstanding, and maybe the watershed engineer can elaborate, but I think that those % reductions were if the buffer is being used for treatment. Is that correct? And this water's treated before it hits the buffer?
Yeah, I think that's the implication, is that the water would be seeping through the buffer towards the stream. You'd start with possibly somewhat polluted water toward the outside of the buffer, and it seeps towards the stream, and it receives this reduction in pollutants and cleaning in the process. But as has just been said, the existing site is already impacted, and this is a much improved water quality over the existing condition. And I don't know whether staff wants to point out the distinction of all those buffers. Buffer efficiency numbers that are in the report there, those are all geared towards stream buffers and achieving a high level of habitat function regardless of how degraded the stream is now. But my understanding, and again, the staff can corroborate this, is that SEPA is measuring things against existing conditions, not against what a higher level of function might be. So the SEPA threshold is, are we making things better or worse based on the existing condition?
Right, and those numbers then that you provided, are those based on a condition in which there's no water treatment, or a condition in which there is treatment?
I don't know the answer to that directly. That's part of the best available science literature of establishing stream buffers in general, with the idea of, you know, getting back to a very high level of function of habitat. Again, keeping in mind that this is a seasonal flow. That's one aspect of it. Go ahead.
Good evening, Development Commission, Keith Niven. So a couple things. One is the applicant has told me that he's more than willing to talk to WashDOT about additional plantings, but he can't guarantee it because he can't speak for WashDOT. But I think he's already stated that he's not trying to impact any environment, and if the commission feels like that's an important piece of an outcome, he's willing to do that as a voluntary measure to respond to concerns raised by the commission. To Commissioner Morgan's maybe comment earlier, something to maybe think about. I would agree with Lucy. I think the split rail fence is appropriate for two reasons. One, for the openness, but two, because you've got this natural edge, and I think that's a better kind of transition to the project from an urban design standpoint than if you had a solid higher fence there. So a question for you might be to consider maybe a solid hedgerow that might be like half the height of the split rail fence to give you a vegetative continuous buffer along that fence edge. So you keep people out, but you also get some additional vegetation along that edge. And I think with a 5 to 7 foot width, that's plenty wide to get a hedgerow in. So something to think about.
So a hedgerow like boxwood that goes up to 3 or 4 feet?
Their landscape architect is shaking his head. What I would say is you could do a hedgerow of some kind. I like boxwood, but they may have a different opinion about what an appropriate hedgerow for the bottom of a split rail fence might look like.
It's called English boxwood for a reason.
I'd love to have, yeah. And I guess my question to you would be then is, could you create a continuous, and how tall of a hedgerow could you create for a continuous run?
Okay. My name is Mark Garf. I'm landscape architect for the applicant. With all due respect, hedges, I don't think make great neighbors. If we put up a hedge along that split rail fence, it just walls people off from the buffer, and so they can't see into it. The second point I might make is this is a retail business. Visibility is important, and we are planting the heck out of the buffer already. And so adding the hedge along the edge, I don't think that helps with their business. And I just don't think that any sort of hedge, well, here, let me back up. There's one plant that, excuse me, that might be appropriate for a hedge along here. It's Pacific wax myrtle. It's sort of native to California, but we don't really have any good evergreen plants that would make a proper hedgerow in this climate. No native plants, I think, would be appropriate for that.
So could you explain to us, I guess, again, my concern is that we have a ditch that has some alamids in it, if I got pronounced it right, baby salmon in it at times. We want to keep the impact out from that. Typically, on the other side, we create the 75-foot buffer, keeps people and things going on from the North Fork. Here, we're not gaining anything, we're not losing anything from what we have generally property line-wise, but we're putting people and cars right up at the property line or within a few feet. But my concern is, what can we create in that limited space of landscaping, be it fence or hedgerow, that in essence blocks people from going into there and impacting it? I'm not worried about any crime risk, anything like that. I don't think there's nefarious stuff that would go on in the ditch that people wouldn't see. It's more of, how can we create something that protects the baby salmon in that stream from what's going on in the parking lot, be it fence or hedgerow or other plantings?
Okay. How about red twig dogwood. And the reason I propose that, number one, it's a native plant. Number two, it grows quickly and gets quite tall, and it can form kind of a dense thicket. But it's also deciduous, and so in the winter it drops its leaves, and it's got nice stems, but it's still fairly thick.
Can I suggest, in the interest of time, that if you like that idea, if the commission likes that idea, and the applicant is willing to design that as an outcome, that whatever particular plant type might be part of a later landscape plan that gets approved. But I think what I'm hearing their landscape architect say is there is some variety of plant hedge that could be combined with the fence to achieve both a better visual separation as well as a physical separation to people getting into the ditch, which is what the fence was intended to do from the get-go. So I think, I'm just trying to say we don't need to design it here, I think.
If you'd like, we could try and write some kind of performance standard, if that's helpful to you.
Okay.
Or do you want to write it?
No, I think that might work. And again, I want to make sure it's not just me that's...
Sure.
Yeah, what's the committee? I guess I'm not feeling like there needs to be a hedge there, so I guess I'd be interested in the other commissioners' input.
I'm curious why we can't, I know we're not designing it here, pick a plant that's just going to spread down the hill all the way to the creek. Plan it out for WashDOT without them really being aware of it. Just allow something that's going to self-seed and creep its way down.
Well, if WashDOT plant...
Sorry. Sure. Sorry, Mike Foster, project biologist. I just wanted to add a data point that the WashDOT, the currently planted WashDOT riparian area has native rose, which is a rhizomatous spreading plant, spreads pretty aggressively, and snowberry. So it's the small, low plant. Also spreads pretty aggressively. Both native, both great, will provide screening function, and that's currently in that newly planted WashDOT area.
So what will be the average height of the WashDOT plantings?
Snowberry and the native rose, 3 to 6 feet in height. And those are the shrubs that I noticed. There are also tree species like willow and western red cedar.
I guess I would argue that WashDOT developed a planting plan that was satisfactory for Fish and Wildlife, both the U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the Washington Fish and Wildlife, and I'm not sure why we would think that it needed to be more than that.
I don't know that they imagine there'd be cars parked right at the edge of the property, in essence. I imagine they did what was best for what they could control. So, yeah.
A question for Commissioner Morgan. Trying to pinpoint the exact spot you're talking about. Are you referring to where the parking stalls are off that 75-foot buffer, or are you referring to the edge of the Bluefield region where it meets up the road?
This is all about the tributary side.
Okay, so this is all about the tributary.
Just the Gold side, yeah.
Okay.
Only that.
I think the WashDOT plantings and their 7-foot buffer should be sufficient to stop headlights intermittent. I mean, it's not like a highway driving by there.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not as concerned about the headlights, just more of the ability of people to, if I'm shopping for a car with my young kids and they say, hey, look, there's a creek down there I'm going to go play with.
Yeah, and I guess my concern is about detention of all the runoff. It's great if it's 100% system that never fails and it's well maintained and all that, but I have concerns about it several years down the road, or a case of a spill or an inadvertent unplanned for event.
It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all that parking along that ditch I mean, it looks like you've got a couple parking islands, which I assume will have landscape on them, and there really is no sidewalk there. Is that correct? Is there a sidewalk anywhere along there, or is it just all stalls?
It's just all stalls, that's correct.
okay.
And there are 2 planters that bisect those stalls.
Okay. So it's possible that the employees on their time off, for example, I mean, they may not even be in that area, right? I mean, they may kind of hang out or take their breaks elsewhere, and it seems like the opportunity for walkability in that area is somewhat limited as well, once you have those tandem stalls laid out like that.
That's correct. And there is a community space out front here. There's a plaza area at the entrance to the Lincoln store. I would guess they would congregate in that area for their breaks.
Additional comments, concerns?
I guess one question would be, so the CPIC conditions are not in our purview at all, other than as recommendations, or whether we think they've been appropriate enough in terms for our decision we're making? Because we're not approving the CPIC conditions, are we?
That's correct, you're not approving those.
Yeah. I guess from my perspective, in reading your condition B, I think I'd be happy if you added some language and that you don't have to do tonight, but some language about acceptable landscaping barrier as well to augment the split rail fence. Again, the whole idea is just to try to prevent people from going into that area, which I don't think anybody wants that to happen anyway, so.
Lucy, are we allowed to ask a question on how a certain condition is being addressed in SEPA?
Sure.
Okay. I have a question for the applicant. In the MDNS, the mitigated determination of non-significance, condition 3B, the stream and buffer shall be encumbered by a public open space, conservation easement granted to the city of Issaquah, or other open space protection mechanism. Can you clarify how or where on the site plan that is being addressed? I guess whether it's a public open space or easement of some sorts.
So NGPE, a native growth protection easement, is required over critical areas. So it would be the North Fork.
North Fork.
And its buffers.
Okay, so it's just referring to the 75-foot buffer that the applicant is going. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Question for the applicant's landscape expert. In your opinion, does the planting area around the tributary, is that equivalent to the mitigation potential of the plantings that we have by the North Fork of Issaquah Creek? Are they equally effective in terms of sediment and nitrogen and phosphorus removal or not, the plantings that are currently in there planted by WashDOT?
Well, again, there's no runoff from our site that is entering the buffer that is not treated. It's all treated with the flow spreader. And so, and I should also point out that the planting that WashDOT has installed and on both the North Fork and the tributary that's in place now, it's growing like crazy. It's, for being neglected and on its own for 2 summers now with no irrigation, it's doing quite well. It's thriving, actually. I mean, there's a few dead trees here and there, which is to be expected, and something that's just been left to its own devices, but it's doing quite well. And on the North Fork of the Issaquah Creek, we're going to be adding to that. Along the ditch, the vegetation that is in place that WashDOT planted, again, is thriving. North of that, the reason, this is my opinion, the reason WashDOT didn't continue up the ditch is there's never any water in there, and they have just left it alone, and that's what we're proposing to do as well, because it's off our property.
Okay, so in your opinion, is the WashDOT planning on the tributary ditch sufficient for preserving the habitat in that water course?
Yes, I think it is.
Question for the applicant. There was a reference earlier about wheel stops. Are those currently planned for the parking stalls along the ditch side? And if so, can you confirm there's adequate room to park two cars in line without handing over the drive aisle?
So that's a SEPA condition that we added, that there needed to be wheel stops along that edge to ensure that, there was not the engine drippy part hanging into the landscape area. And we generally allow 2 feet. So we want everything contained over the paved surfaces. And that's our experience, is that if with wheel stops in the right place, you're still, the length, the car fits in the stall.
Okay, thank you.
Other thoughts, concerns, questions?
So I guess just a comment. It seems to me that the questions that come up is it, from code, is it a ditch or a stream? And it seems like for code, it's a ditch. Regulation that we would have to look at and treat it by, that we couldn't, I don't see how we would make a different conclusion that, no, this is not a ditch, it's a stream, and it would all be different. In which case, then the question is, are the sepia, is it better or worse than it is right now? And it seems to me that the water quality could end up being better in terms of how it flows out. It doesn't seem like it's going to be any worse in that ditch than it is now.
Yeah, in general, I think I agree. I did want to bring up one point in response to a comment from the public regarding our definition of stream versus ditch in the IMC. Staff mentioned that different municipalities have different definitions for stream. And indeed, I think the IMC definition is not consistent with county code definition for stream in a pretty important way, I think. This is from the King County Sensitive Area Ordinance, their definition of stream. Streams are defined in the Sensitive Area Ordinance as those areas of King County where surface waters produce a defined channel or bed, very similar to IMC definition. A defined channel or bed is an area that demonstrates clear evidence of the passage of water and includes but is not limited to bedrock channels, gravel beds, sand and silt beds, and defined channel swales, very similar to our definition as well. The channel or bed need not contain water year-round. This definition is not meant to include irrigation ditches, canals, storm or surface water runoff devices, or other entirely artificial water courses unless they are used by salmonids or used to convey streams naturally occurring prior to construction in such water course. So a lot of that definition is very similar to the IMC code definition, except for the phrase, unless it contains salmonids. So given that we have a critical area here, and that is from the sensitive area guidance of King County, just putting that out is something that I think we need to have in consideration as we're deliberating in regard to this. And also consider when section Title 18 is revised.
Further thoughts?
When will Title 18 be revised?
Next year.
Imagine it might have language like that?
I imagine there'll be a lot of discussion around that topic.
Final thoughts? Any motions, anything to add?
You too?
Sure.
We can make a decision. Move the Development Commission approve the site development permit for the Evergreen Ford Lincoln project, file number SDP 19-00001, the Associated Administrative Adjustment of Standards, file number AAS 19-00005, as described and evaluated in the staff report dated May 1st, 2019, with attachments 1 through 8. Briefing response memo dated August 14th, 2019, with attachments 1 through 6. And project drawings and reports received March 5th, 2019, and all subsequent submittals up to July 21, 2019, and subject to the conditions therein and as amended tonight, including revised condition 10, consistent with the minimum tree density standards in SIDS 10.10, the applicant shall plant 110 trees measuring a minimum of 2-inch caliper on-site or in an approved off-site location, or else make a payment into the tree fund in lieu of providing replacement trees. Do you need any other mention of anything, any other materials from tonight, or?
We don't have any changes to the STP conditions proposed.
So I hear a motion.
Second.
Is there discussion?
Would you like me, if I wanted to make a motion to add a condition to revise SEPA? Or?
I don't think that's in your purview, but I think that we've heard your request loud and clear, and I think that we can work with the applicant to explore what kind of native plants can go in there to
Create a barrier.
I think that Mark Garf, I think described, or Mike Foster, one of those two gentlemen, mentioned the size of the plants, that are planted in WashDOT, and that seemed to be the kind of scale that you thought was
Right.
important, and I think we would want that continuity anyway, and it sounds like it would be effective in achieving your goal.
Agreed.
Relying on the expert opinion regarding the plantings around the tributary, I'm satisfied that that's adequate mitigation there.
Further discussion?
I second that opinion. I think a reevaluation of some of the planting types there along those parking stalls and that ditch is worth taking a look at. I think overall, what we've been presented has been some very thorough details, and we are taking an existing site and what I think is making it in a better situation. And so I support the decision to move forward.
So I will call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion, passing the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chair, I move the Development Commission direct the Development Services Department to prepare findings of fact and conclusions for review and approval by the Development Commission Chairman, affirming the Development Commission's decision to approve the Evergreen Ford Lincoln project, file numbers SDP 19-00001 and AAS 19-00005, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report dated May 1, 2019, with attachments 1 through 8, briefing response memo dated August 21st, 2019, with attachments 1 through 6, and project drawings and reports received March 5th, 2019, and all subsequent submittals up to July 21, 2019, and subject to the conditions therein and as amended tonight.
Second.
So a motion's been made and seconded. Is there discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So I think we've done our job. I do want to make a couple of comments. One is that, earlier a gentleman made some comment about being for and against, and I think it's really important when we get into these public opportunities to realize that difference of opinions don't necessarily have to be for or against. They can be, let's just make it better. I don't think there's necessarily a prohibition to development. I just think that we have a wonderful, unique opportunity in this democracy to be able to participate in the decision-making process, and I think it's really critical that we afford each other the luxury of being able to articulate different opinions and not necessarily feel like it's for or against. It's just healthy. And I want to thank all the people that made comments, both positive ones that are for comments and against comments, because they just make us better. And that's what this commission is about, and what we're trying to do in the city is being transparent. So I thank you all for your participation. I'm sorry we ran a little late. We usually go till 12 or 12:30, but I can see that I appreciate your participation, and just encourage you all to be safe going home. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Oh, wait, no, I can't adjourn the meeting. I have to say, there's other business. Our next meeting is currently scheduled for October 16th in the council chambers. Now we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.